Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Why did they speak over her voice as if she wasn't even there? The room smelled of strong coffee and paper warmed by fluorescent lights. The low hum of a printer filled the air between clipped words, acronyms, and the scratch of pens against folders. Officers leaned over satellite maps, sharp voices darting back and forth, their tones brisk and certain. They carried the weight of command like armor. And in the corner, quiet, unnoticed, stood Staff Sergeant Noel. Her uniform was neat but plain. No ribbons, no patches that called attention. Her hair was tied into a regulation-perfect bun, not a strand out of place. To them, she was a shadow in camouflage. Background noise. She carried a carafe of coffee like a servant in uniform, the invisible cog in a machine that ran without asking where its gears came from. One colonel glanced her way only long enough to snap an order. Make sure we've got extra copies of the operations draft, and pastries if the commissary still has them. Yes, sir. Her reply was soft, measured. Another officer, eyes glued to her folder, didn't look up as she reminded Noel what kind of coffee the general would want when he arrived. Black. No sugar, no cream. Always the same. Noel's voice came steady again, controlled. Understood, ma'am. And that was all they saw her as. Furniture. An answer when they needed one. A machine in human form, replaceable, forgettable. But beneath the quiet exterior was a stillness that wasn't compliance, it was discipline. She had played this role many times. She had learned the value of being underestimated. When no one thought you mattered, they dropped their guard. They spoke too freely. They revealed what they shouldn't. So she poured coffee, she stacked filters. She folded her hands and waited at the edges, eyes scanning, always scanning, not in defiance but in silence, watching, absorbing. At 7:48, the hallway outside fell silent. A rhythm of boots echoed, crisp, deliberate. The air shifted even before the door opened. General Dalton stepped inside. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His presence carried authority like a shadow. His uniform was pressed so sharp it seemed to cut the light. 4 silver stars glinted on his shoulders. The room straightened as if on instinct, conversations halting mid-word. Respect, not fear, took hold of the air. Dalton's gaze swept the table, the maps, the faces. For the briefest moment his eyes brushed past Noel in the corner. No pause, no recognition, just another piece of background. "Let's begin," he said, calm, commanding, final. The colonels launched into their presentations. One flicked a laser pointer across satellite images, symbols dancing in red and blue. Another rattled off encrypted frequencies, fallback windows, contingency protocols. Their tones were rehearsed, every line delivered as though to prove how much they belonged in this room. And Noel stood still, hands folded, gaze quiet. She looked like she wasn't listening, but every detail burned into her mind. Every blind spot, every delay, every misplaced assumption. Dalton asked questions in clipped bursts. He didn't waste words. Deployment timelines, transport vulnerabilities. He moved with surgical clarity, each question slicing away vagueness. At one point his eyes shifted, just slightly, toward the coffee station. A nod so small most wouldn't notice, but Noel caught it instantly. She moved with measured steps, waited for a pause, then crossed to refill his cup. Her movements were smooth, silent, but as she leaned to pour, her sleeve slid back just an inch, enough to reveal the steel ring on her left hand. The light caught on it, scratched edges, worn steel, a trident carved deep. Dalton froze. His hand paused halfway to the page. His chest rose slowly, eyes locked not on the coffee, but on the ring. The sound in the room seemed to dull, as if someone had turned down the volume on every other voice. The colonels kept talking, oblivious. The lieutenants by the window shuffled their papers, but Dalton's eyes never moved. He knew what he was seeing. That ring wasn't jewelry. It wasn't a trinket from a gift shop. It was a mark earned only by surviving the most punishing crucible the military had to offer, a Navy SEAL trident. And he knew something else. He had seen only a handful of women wear one. Details sharpened in his vision, the way her stance balanced naturally, as if always aware of exits, the calm control in her breathing, the quiet precision in her movements. This was no administrative staff sergeant. Noel placed the carafe down, stepped back, posture even. Her face betrayed nothing, but Dalton's silence thickened, pressing against the walls of the room. He set his pen aside, his voice cut through like steel drawn from a sheath. "Staff Sergeant." Every head turned. The colonel froze mid-sentence. The laser pointer shook in his hand. Pens hovered above paper. Silence consumed the room. "Yes, sir," Noel answered, calm, alert. Dalton's gaze stayed fixed. "That's an interesting ring you're wearing." A faint scoff from one officer, a muttered dismissal from another. They thought it was a joke, a knockoff, some meaningless token. But Noel didn't flinch. Her voice carried steady, clear. "But as Class 351, I passed." The room stopped breathing. The colonels blinked, unsure they had heard her correctly. The air grew dense, heavy with disbelief. And then Dalton's chair creaked as he leaned back, eyes never leaving hers. "Colonels, step outside." The words dropped like hammer strikes. Confusion flashed across their faces, frustration, but rank had no argument. They gathered their papers stiffly, walked out with the scrape of chairs and clipped silence. Dalton turned the lock. Now it was just the general, the staff sergeant, and a table full of classified maps. "Report the truth," Dalton said, his voice flat. "No summaries." Noel straightened, every line of her posture sharp. Her words came clean, measured. "Northern Syria, hostage extraction, 3 American contractors held by an ISIS-linked cell. Objective achieved, all 3 recovered alive." "Casualties?" Dalton pressed. Her voice didn't waver. "IED struck convoy on. Master Chief Leo killed instantly. Petty officers and Lake also lost." Dalton's jaw tightened. He knew those names. He had read them in the reports, but reports didn't breathe. Reports didn't carry the weight of surviving what others didn't. "I was trapped under collapsed steel. 4 hours, extracted alive. 6 weeks in treatment, 9 more in rehab. Range of motion restored, strength above baseline. I am fit." Silence stretched between them. Dalton studied her face. He saw no dramatics, no embellishment, just facts precise and stripped of decoration. But beneath the surface, he saw it. The quiet ache of survival. The discipline it took to hold grief inside without letting it consume her. He tapped the table once with his knuckle, mind clear. Her inhale was steady. "Every morning I remember them. Like, they are gone, but I am fit." The silence that followed was heavier than the noise before it. Dalton finally shifted a folder toward her, his tone sharpened. "You've been quiet this whole briefing, yet you were watching. Tell me what you saw." Noel stepped forward. Her finger traced the satellite map with absolute precision. "Blind spot here. Northwest angle, exactly 32 meters. Camera coverage won't catch it. That's where they'll stage the ambush. This line," her finger slid across a green route, "it runs over patch surface. Vibrations. Cheap drones pick it up. Trigger an alert. They'll be waiting here." Her delivery was surgical, final. Dalton leaned in, eyes narrowing, pen scratching furiously across the margin of his notes. Every adjustment she spoke rewrote the battlefield. Every sentence cut through hours of officer planning. He looked up finally, gaze steady. "You caught this while pouring coffee?" "Yes, sir," eyes open. Dalton let out a slow breath through his nose. His expression softened, not with weakness but with recognition. The lock clicked as he opened the door. The colonels stepped back in, their irritation sharp. They expected the briefing to resume. Instead, Dalton's voice carried a new weight. "We'll coordinate operational planning." The words landed like live fire. The room shifted. The sergeant they had ignored now stood at the center. Their authority, once so certain, thinned in an instant. And Noel, the invisible woman with the coffee pot, had just changed the battlefield. She stood at the heart of the Tactical Operations Center, the hum of electronics pressing against her ears. The air smelled faintly of metal and ozone, screens glowing with maps and shifting icons. Radios hissed, voices clipped and steady, carrying tension across every channel. It was weeks after the briefing that had shattered her invisibility, but the memory of that moment lingered in her bones. Now there was no corner to retreat to, no carafe in her hand, no shadow to disappear into. She wore a headset instead, her voice steady in the storm, her eyes fixed on the mission board that pulsed with lines, routes, and enemy markers. Her name wasn't whispered as background anymore. It was spoken in clear, measured tones. The one Dalton trusted. And trust carried its own weight. Behind her, the room shifted with constant movement. Officers, technicians, communications staff, each one locked into their own rhythm. Above them all, the mission clock ticked down, red numbers sliding toward zero. Task Force Lumen, status green, a comms officer called out. Copy, Noel answered. Her tone was calm, grounded. All teams confirmed check-ins. One by one, the voices rolled back through her headset. Alpha Team, Bravo Team, Charlie Team. Each voice firm, confident, ready. The cadence of professionals who knew the stakes but trusted the structure around them. Her eyes flicked across the central display. Tiny icons glowed, blue shapes sliding across enemy territory. Every movement had meaning, every shift a choice. She remembered Hell Week, the Pacific waves like knives against skin, hours half buried in sand, bodies linked with teammates, instructors screaming over the surf. She remembered the bone-deep exhaustion, the taste of salt, the fight to keep her hand locked in another's when every muscle begged to let go. Stay awake, stay alive. Those words echoed now, years later, as the icons moved across the map. Her voice cut the air with clarity. Alpha, alter your egress route. Shift from green line to black. Do not cross sector A3. Copy, shifting to black, came the response. Wheels in motion. Bravo, same adjustment, confirm. Black line acknowledged. Charlie, maintain coverage on Alpha's flank. Copy, adjusting. Her tone never wavered, calm, absolute. Then static cracked across one of the screens. A feed wavered. Lines of interference blurred the image, red warning text flashing. Drone 2 showing interference, a technician muttered, adjusting dials, frustration tightening his jaw. Another screen flickered, then stuttered. Signal strength dropped, a jagged line cutting across the monitor. Noel's eyes narrowed. Her voice came low, firm. That's the vibration trigger. They've set sensors under the patch surface. It's live. The room stiffened. Dalton stood behind her, silent. He hadn't come to command. He was here to watch, to let her prove what he had already suspected. Noel didn't hesitate. Alpha, hold position. Bravo, adjust 30 meters east. Charlie, cover their flank. Maintain visual. Orders crisp, deliberate. On the screen, the blue icons shifted. Small movements but critical. Seconds later, hostile markers lit up in Sector A3. Enemy positions moving fast, swarming. An ambush triggered into empty air. The control room inhaled as one. Gunfire crackled faintly through a radio feed, but it wasn't American voices in panic. It was hostile chatter, confusion, shouting. Their trap had failed. Suppress the North Corridor, Noel ordered. Through Delta Gate, 10 minutes all clear. Her hand traced the routes faster than any pointer could. Her tone carried the precision of lived memory, a survivor who knew what seconds meant when lives balanced on them. The teams responded instantly. Alpha confirmed. Bravo echoed. Charlie locked their flank. Minutes dragged like hours. Each shift of an icon pulled the air in the room, Officers leaned closer to their screens. Technicians held their breath between updates. The only voice that cut through with certainty was hers. Alpha clear. Bravo clear. Charlie clear. One by one, the icons slid out of the hot zone. No losses, no surprises. When the last call came, all units clear, the room erupted not in cheers but in the exhale of survival. Officers unclenched fists. Technicians leaned back, muttering relief. A hand clapped another on the shoulder. Small victories in silence. Noel removed her headset slowly. Her hands were steady. Her eyes lingered on the map until the board went neutral. Every icon faded back to calm gray. Dalton stepped forward. He didn't smile wide. He didn't clap or speak in grand tones. But his nod carried more weight than any cheer could. The colonels who once doubted her sat off to the side. Their silence was louder than protest. Mercer's jaw locked tight, eyes low. His pen rested useless on her pad. Noel felt her shoulders drop just slightly. The weight she carried wasn't gone, but for the first time in months she carried it differently. She thought of Lake. Their names pressed into her chest like stones she refused to set down. But as she whispered under her breath, too soft for anyone else to hear, the words weren't only grief. We did it. Dalton's judgment had been vindicated. In the after-action review, his voice was measured but firm. Is restored to full operational status. The words logged into permanent ink, a decision no one in the room would challenge. Mercer filed for reassignment the next morning, followed within days, citing career growth. But everyone knew the truth. Authority doesn't survive when arrogance blinds it. And word traveled fast. Across Meridian Base, whispers carried. The woman once dismissed as a coffee server had redirected an operation, prevented an ambush, and brought every team back alive. The one Dalton trusted. The military machine doesn't move on gossip alone. Reports followed, her file rewritten, hidden records resurfaced, redacted lines crossed out, notes marked her as high value, field ready. And beneath the lines of ink the story grew. A sergeant who had survived what most couldn't, who carried scars not for show but as anchors. 6 months later, the setting was no longer Meridian. It was Washington, D.C. Joint Interagency Command Hall. The stakes had shifted. The walls larger, the table longer, the room filled with not only colonels but representatives from Rangers, SEALs, CIA. The kind of room where every word mattered, where authority was currency. And at the head of the table sat Noel. Not in the shadows, not in the corner. The chair was hers. Her voice carried clear across the hall, drawing lines across digital maps, timelines glowing on screens. We are coordinating a joint strike under Task Force Lumen Authority. Assets span 4 branches. Timelines are critical. No one questioned her directives. No one scoffed at her words. Every colonel who once dismissed her now took notes. Dalton sat near the back. He didn't need to lead this time. He had already made his choice months ago, and today, watching her command the room, he knew it had been right. But for Noel, the moment wasn't about proving herself anymore. It was about carrying the weight forward. Because in her silence, she noticed someone others didn't. The young Air Force lieutenant who slipped into the back of the hall, tablet under one arm, notebook in the other, shoulders hunched slightly, angling his chair for the exits, his voice small when spoken to, almost invisible. She remembered that posture, that silence, that weight. The meeting ended, papers stacked, officers filing out. The lieutenant gathered his things quickly, trying to vanish into the edges. No, Noel said, her tone firm but not sharp. Wait. He froze, surprised. She walked to him, her eyes measured, her voice calm. Lieutenant, I saw the notes you took. You tracked every shift in the timeline. That wasn't clerical. He hesitated. Ma'am, I was just here for communication support, nothing else. But his voice cracked with truth unsaid. "What's your background?" she pressed. A pause, then an exhale. "Combat controller, 3 deployments, Afghanistan. Took an IED hit last run. Grounded while I recover." Her eyes dropped to his wrist. His sleeve had slipped just enough to show faded ink. The combat controller badge, not decoration, not pretense, proof written in skin. Recognition struck her instantly. And in that moment, she became what Dalton had been for her, the one who saw through silence. She extended her hand, firm, solid. "Staff Sergeant," she said, her voice was steady, deliberate. "We need to talk." The lieutenant took her hand, gripped tight, almost relieved. An unspoken bond passed in that moment, operator to operator, survivor to survivor. The room was empty now, but the echo of their voices carried. And Noelle understood something deeper than survival, deeper than proving herself. The circle wasn't only about being seen. It was about seeing others. The weight she carried for, like it would never fade, but it could be transformed, carried differently, passed forward. Not just survival, not just leadership, but dignity in silence, the kind that doesn't speak, the kind that simply acts. She stared at the mission board, its surface alive with red and blue lights shifting like a storm across the screen. The room was quiet except for the hum of cooling fans and the constant buzz of encrypted transmissions. Yet beneath the machinery of war, her pulse beat slow, steady. Why had command trusted her with this? Why put her at the center, when so many still whispered behind closed doors that she wasn't ready, that she didn't belong? The answer wasn't spoken aloud, but it lingered in Dalton's silence. He had seen what others ignored. He had watched her rewrite a battlefield with a few sentences. And now, the responsibility was hers alone. This wasn't training, this wasn't shadow work, this was live. The operation stretched across 2 borders, the kind of mission that drew together branches who didn't always cooperate easily. SEALs, Rangers, Air Force controllers, CIA analysts. Task Force Lumen, a patchwork of the best, pulled into one fragile thread. The mission: interdict an arms convoy before it crossed into territory where recovery would be impossible. Noelle stood at the front of the operations tent, headset resting against her neck for now, her hand tracing across the digital map. She outlined enemy supply lines, timing windows, fallback routes. Her voice was even, precise, leaving no space for hesitation. Alpha will breach at waypoint Delta. Bravo sets the outer cordon. Charlie holds reserve in the hills. We have 12 minutes to isolate the convoy before it passes into the dead zone. The room listened. Even those who still doubted couldn't deny the clarity of her delivery. Every word was measured, every pause deliberate. She glanced at the back row. The young lieutenant, his name Hayes, sat there silent as usual, notebook open, pen scratching as though each second carried weight. He didn't meet her eyes, but she noticed the way his shoulders lifted when she spoke his team's role into the plan. For the first time since meeting him, his body carried a flicker of something different. Not resignation, not invisibility, readiness. But readiness wasn't enough. She knew that too well. Hours later, the night air wrapped around her like a second uniform. They were forward now, not in a command hall but at the edge of the desert. Stars burned above like shards of ice, scattered across blackness. The horizon held no light, only the faint glow of heat plumes where enemy movement stirred. She adjusted her headset. Her breathing was steady, but inside memory flickered. Syria, the collapsed steel, the sound of bones breaking under weight, the silence after the blast when her brothers didn't answer back. She pushed the images down, the way she had trained herself to for years, but ghosts never truly obeyed. Alpha status, her voice carried over the net. Green. Bravo. Green. Charlie. Green. Hayes' voice came last, steady but soft. Controller set, green. She exhaled slowly. For him, this was more than a role. It was a return to something he thought he had lost. and she felt the responsibility not only of the mission but of him, his chance to find himself again. The minutes ticked. Icons moved across the tablet she held. Drones fed back their blurred night vision images. Heat signatures glowed faintly in the dark. The convoy appeared, trucks heavy with cargo, armored escorts crawling forward. Too many weapons for one region, enough to shift balance across borders, enough to fuel months of bloodshed. Alpha move. The first team slid from shadow, night optics glinting. Bravo shifted wide, silhouettes against the low ridge. Charlie held, rifles trained outward, waiting for contact. Every second was calculated, but nothing ever went perfectly. A burst of static, a drone feed glitched, then returned. Enemy icons flickered. One vehicle had peeled from the main line, moving faster than expected. "Correction," Hayes said suddenly. His voice carried urgency but not panic. "Truck 4 accelerating. They're probing." Noel's eyes snapped to the feed. He was right. The truck had shifted speed in a way that wasn't random. It was scouting, baiting. "Alpha, hold." The reply came sharp. "We'll lose the window." "Hold," her tone cut through the protest. The truck accelerated, lights off, rumbling forward into what should have been Alpha's line of attack. And then it detonated. A fireball ripped through the night, dirt and steel erupting into the sky. A planted charge, bait for whoever waited in ambush. If Alpha had moved, if she hadn't stopped them. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. Relief never showed on her face, but the room around her exhaled. Even through radios, she felt it. Trust born in a single decision. Alpha shift south, breach at Bravo's mark. The decoy is spent, move now. Orders flew, boots moved, rifles cracked. The firefight erupted in controlled bursts. The convoy's lead truck burned, secondary detonations pounding against the earth, but the rest of the vehicles were caught in a vice. Bravo pinched the flank. Alpha pressed in. Charlie cut down the retreat. Her voice guided each shift, each pivot. Hayes called adjustments, his tone firmer with each correction. He saw what others didn't. She listened, and together, their voices interlaced into something seamless. Minutes bled into what felt like hours, but in the end the board cleared. Hostile signals collapsed into silence. The convoy was broken. And every American voice checked in alive. The desert stank of burning fuel and scorched earth. Teams gathered prisoners, sifted through wreckage. Noel removed her headset, the chill night air rushing against her skin. Dalton's voice came across the net at last, calm but weighted. "Confirm no losses." Her reply carried not triumph but steadiness. All teams accounted, no casualties. There was silence on the line, not disbelief, something quieter, something closer to respect. Hours later, back in the dim glow of the debriefing tent, officers spoke low, their voices careful. No one dismissed her now. No one dared. Hayes sat near the edge, notebook open, his hands still, listening as Noel reported. She listed details with surgical clarity, every flaw in the enemy's plan, every adjustment that had prevented disaster. When she finished, the room was quiet. Dalton's eyes met hers. He didn't need to say the words aloud. The nod he gave her carried the same weight it always had, a recognition deeper than applause. But when she stepped outside into the cold dawn air, the ghosts returned. Lake. She thought of their faces, how easily it could have been one of tonight's teams instead. Survival never erased the weight of those lost. It only shifted it. She closed her eyes, inhaling the metallic tang of the battlefield still clinging to her uniform. And in the silence, a thought cut deep. Strength wasn't only about surviving. It was about carrying others forward, even when the burden pressed into your bones. She opened her eyes. The sun bled slowly across the horizon, painting the sand in pale fire. The mission was done, but her war, the one inside her, wasn't. Why did victories feel heavier than losses? Why, after bringing every operator back alive, did she sit alone under a buzzing fluorescent light with her chest full of ghosts. The mission report lay open in front of her, pages scattered with neat black ink. Every casualty column read the same, 0. Every objective marked, achieved. Yet as the others left the debriefing hall, laughter low and tired relief in their voices, Noel stayed behind. The room smelled of stale coffee and recycled air, the kind of scent that clung to military walls everywhere. Her fingers brushed the page as though touching proof, but her mind drifted back years, to the names etched inside her memory. Lake. 3 ghosts that followed her into every mission, no matter the outcome. The convoy ambush had been avoided. Hayes had caught the signal in time. Her decision had saved Alpha from walking into fire. And yet, in the silence afterward, she heard laugh, muttered sarcasm, Lake's quiet steadiness. She heard them not because they were there, but because they were. Dalton's nod earlier still carried weight, but recognition didn't silence grief. It never had. She leaned back in the chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling's flickering light. In another room, officers were already filing recommendations. Promotions, commendations, praise wrapped in paperwork. But Noel knew better than to think validation erased loss. The battlefield didn't balance like ledgers. It never did. Her hands clenched, then relaxed. She closed the folder. A knock sounded lightly against the open doorframe. Hayes stood there, notebook still in his hand, shoulders slightly hunched. His voice came soft. "Ma'am, do you have a minute?" She studied him in silence for a moment. He had the same look she once wore, the look of someone who knew he had value, but doubted anyone else believed it. The look of someone who carried scars that didn't always show. "Come in," she said. He stepped into the room, his boots quiet against the tile. He didn't sit until she motioned. Even then, his posture was straight, respectful, but not stiff. "I wanted to thank you," he began. His voice faltered, then steadied, "for trusting my call earlier with the truck." Noel's eyes stayed on him, steady. "You were right, I listened. That's what matters." He hesitated, then exhaled. "I haven't had anyone listen in a while." There it was, the crack in his armor. She recognized it instantly. The way silence could bury someone deeper than any wound. She leaned forward slightly, her tone softening but firm. "Combat controller, 3 deployments. You didn't imagine those scars. You didn't imagine what you saw out there. Being overlooked doesn't erase what you've earned." His jaw tightened. "After IEDs, after rehab, they put me in admin. Files, radios, endless checklists. I thought maybe they were right, that I was done." Her eyes flicked to the notebook in his hand. "And yet you tracked every shift tonight, saw things others missed. Tell me, does that look like someone done?" Silence, but his throat worked as if swallowing back an answer. She let the quiet sit. She had learned the value of pauses, how they gave weight to words. Finally, he nodded just once. "You reminded me," he admitted, "that I can still do this." Noel's eyes lowered briefly, not in shame but in memory. Dalton had done the same for her, seen her ring, asked her to speak when others wanted her silent. The circle was closing. "Hayes," she said, voice low but deliberate, "don't let them bury you. You've already survived more than most ever will. That isn't weakness. That's proof." His grip tightened around the notebook, knuckles pale. She saw the weight lift just slightly from his shoulders. Not gone, but carried differently. The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't heavy. It was shared. When he stood to leave, she added, "Next mission, you're not just comms. You'll sit at my table." His eyes widened slightly. He nodded, no words left, and left the room. Noel leaned back again, the ghosts still there. But tonight they felt less like anchors, more like guides. She thought of Grin's muttering, Lake's patience. She wondered what they'd say if they saw her now. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps just a nod the way Dalton had given her. The next weeks moved fast. Operations didn't pause for grief or reflection. Missions blurred into one another, intel briefings, field movements, tense nights watching signals shift across dark screens. Through it all, Hayes remained at her side. He spoke sparingly, but when he did, his words mattered. He caught anomalies others missed. He asked questions most overlooked. She saw in him the same edge she once carried, sharpened by survival, dulled by dismissal, waiting to be honed again. She didn't call it mentorship. She didn't call it anything. She just gave him space, trust, and expectation, and he rose to it. One night, after a long debrief, they walked out into the cold air together. The sky above was sharp with stars, the base floodlights throwing harsh white against the gravel. "Ma'am," Hayes said suddenly, voice tentative, "do you ever feel guilty about surviving?" The words hung between them like a blade. Noel stopped walking, her breath fogged in the cold. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Every day," she said finally. His eyes searched hers. She continued, her voice low, almost breaking but held steady. "I remember their faces, the way the blast sounded. I wake up some mornings hearing it all over again, and I ask why it wasn't me." He swallowed hard, his throat tight. "That's how I feel. Sometimes I think maybe I didn't deserve to come back." Her gaze didn't waver. "Listen to me carefully, Hayes. Survival isn't about deserving. It's about carrying. If you're here, it's because you have something left to carry, for them, for the ones who didn't make it." He nodded slowly, eyes wet in the harsh light, but he didn't look away. Noel's hand tightened briefly on his shoulder, steady and grounding. "You honor them by living, by doing the work, not by doubting yourself." They stood in silence under the stars. Two survivors, bound by scars, tethered by the unspoken truth that the dead walked with them every step. That night Noel dreamed again of the collapsed steel, the weight crushing her ribs, the silence where voices should have been. She woke before dawn, the taste of dust still in her throat. But when she pulled on her boots, the memory of Hayes' eyes steadied her. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was carrying. And that realization was both comfort and burden. Because she knew what came next. Leadership was not only about calling orders in the heat of battle. It was about standing in front of ghosts and asking others to follow, knowing the cost, knowing the silence that might follow after. And that silence was coming again. The next mission briefing had already been marked, a hostage recovery across hostile lines, high risk, no guarantees. The kind of mission where survival wasn't promised. The kind of mission where the weight of ghosts grew heavier. And as Noel sat at the head of the table, eyes scanning maps, Hayes at her side, Dalton watching from the back with the stillness of a man who had seen this cycle before, she knew the truth. The test wasn't over. It was only beginning. Why was her hand steady when her heart was? The desert stretched ahead in a vast silence, the horizon broken only by the jagged silhouette of a compound lit faintly by the moon. The air was cold, sharper than expected, carrying the faint smell of dust and oil. Somewhere inside those walls, 3 hostages were waiting. Somewhere inside, a dozen men armed and ruthless guarded them. And outside, crouched in the shadows, Staff Sergeant Noel was back in the field. The headset pressed against her ear hummed with clipped transmissions. Bravo team whispered movement confirmations. Charlie confirmed overwatch positions. Alpha, the assault team, waited for her word. She hadn't worn this gear in over a year. The last time, steel had collapsed around her, fire tearing the night, and 3 teammates had been silenced forever. Her breathing came slow, controlled, but beneath it lived the memory of the blast, the silence, the weight of steel crushing her ribs until her vision blurred, the names of the dead. She blinked, forced herself back. Not then, now. She touched the trident ring briefly through her glove, a grounding ritual, then spoke into the calm. "Alpha, move." Shadows detached from the sand, flowing low and fast. Bravo shifted wide, setting the cordon. Charlie's rifles scanned from above. Hayes whispered confirmations, his voice even measured. Noel's role wasn't to breach doors. Not anymore. Her role was to see the whole board, to orchestrate. But as she watched Alpha move toward the compound, every step sent a tremor through her chest. The outer wall was breached silently. A cutter hissed. The metal gate bent inward. Alpha slid inside. "Clear," came the whisper. "Proceed," Noel replied. She watched their icons move across the display on her wrist screen, tiny blips glowing faintly. Each one was a heartbeat she was responsible for. Inside the compound, darkness pressed close. Hallways narrow, shadows deep. The hostages were supposed to be in the central room, guarded by two men, but supposed to had never kept her alive before. A muffled crack of suppressed gunfire, a voice over the comm, "Two down, hallway clear." They were moving fast, efficient. And yet something felt wrong. Her eyes scanned the heat map overlay from the drones above. Too few signals, too quiet. "Hayes," she murmured, "count the hostiles again." His fingers flew over the tablet, his brow furrowed. Reading 7 total. Intel said 12 minimum. Her gut tightened. "Alpha, hold position," she ordered. Static buzzed in her ear. A pause, then a reply. "We're at the door, hostages in sight. Do you want us to wait?" She exhaled once. Her instinct screamed, "Too quiet, too easy." "Negative, Bravo, confirm perimeter." "Clear," Bravo replied. "Charlie, confirm rooftop surveillance." "Clear, no movement." It didn't fit. And then she saw it, the faintest flicker on the drone feed. Heat blooms beneath the sand outside the compound walls. Buried charges. It was a trap. Her voice sharpened instantly. "Alpha, abort extraction. Fall back now." Confusion crackled across the comms. But the hostages. Now. The floor beneath Alpha's position erupted in fire. The compound shuddered as hidden charges detonated, ripping walls inward, collapsing dust into the air. Her screen flared with static, icons flickering. "Noel," Hayes' voice cut through, signals dropping. "Alpha, report," she shouted, her calm cracking for the first time. "Silence." Her chest seized. For one sickening heartbeat it was again. The weight of steel, the names unspoken. Then a voice rasped through static. "We're hit. 2 down, alive but pinned. Hostages still secure, need cover fire now." Relief collided with fear. Not dead, not yet. Bravo, shift, cover Alpha's withdrawal. Charlie, suppress north wall. Hayes, give me a path out of that building. Her words snapped like gunfire, pulling chaos into order. The night erupted. Tracers streaked across the compound, bullets tearing through the dark. Alpha's voices strained but steady, dragging wounded, shielding hostages. Hayes worked furiously, sweat streaking down his temple. "There's a secondary exit, east wall. It's narrow, leads straight into a blind corridor, but it's their only shot." She didn't hesitate. "Alpha, shift east, breach through secondary exit. Bravo, cover their run. Charlie, hold fire until you see them." "Copy," Alpha rasped. The comms filled with shouts, gunfire, the grunt of exertion. Noel's heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady, commanding every shift. The icons on her screen moved, slow, uneven, but they moved. One by one, they cleared the compound. Wounded carried, hostages shielded. Bullets sparked against walls, but her teams flowed like water, each one guided by her words. Finally, the last voice came through. "All clear, hostages secure, moving to." Noel closed her eyes briefly, her exhale shaking just slightly. She pressed the comm. "Copy, good work, all teams fall back." The desert fell into uneasy silence again, broken only by the faint crackle of distant flames. She lowered her headset, her hands trembling for the first time. She pressed them against her knees, forcing steadiness back into her bones. Hayes sat across from her in the command tent hours later, his face pale, eyes haunted but alive. "You saved them," he said quietly. Noelle shook her head once. We almost lost them, we almost repeated. He frowned, confused. Her voice softened, but the words cut sharp. 3 men died under my command once. I survived. That guilt doesn't fade. Tonight I thought I was about to carry 3 more names. I can't let that happen again. Hayes leaned forward, his voice low but firm. But it didn't, because you saw it, because you called it. If you hadn't, we'd be carrying bodies right now. His eyes locked on hers. Don't bury the victory under ghosts. She stared at him, silence stretching. For the first time she realized the circle had turned. She had given him strength weeks ago. Tonight he was giving it back. Dalton entered then, his presence filling the tent. He studied the exhausted faces, the quiet steadiness in Noelle's posture, the haunted look that never left her eyes. Mission complete, he said. His tone was calm, final. All hostages recovered, minimal injuries, no fatalities. He looked directly at her. You did what leaders do, you carried them out. She nodded once, unable to speak. As Dalton left, Hayes' words lingered. Don't bury the victory under ghosts. But when Noelle closed her eyes that night, she still saw the blast. She still heard silence where voices should have been. Because leadership wasn't about surviving battles. It was about surviving yourself afterward. And that was the war she wasn't sure she could win. Why did silence feel louder after mission than the gunfire itself? The compound was ashes now, the hostages safe, the wounded recovering. Yet in the days that followed, Noelle walked through Meridian Base with a weight pressing deeper than ever. The official report had already spread. No fatalities, all hostages recovered, ambush avoided. On paper it was flawless. In whispers it became something else. Saw it coming. Stopped the ambush. Pulled Alpha out alive. Her name echoed down corridors where weeks ago it hadn't been spoken at all. A staff sergeant who had once been dismissed as coffee service now carried a reputation she hadn't asked for. Officers who had barely looked at her before now paused when she passed. Some nodded. Some studied her like an anomaly. And beneath it all, she felt the ghosts pressing harder. Lake. The name she couldn't shake. She remembered their laughter, their stubborn grit, their voices shouting through dust. She remembered silence afterward. And each time she heard her own name whispered with respect, she wondered if it wasn't theirs that deserved it more. Nights were worse. She woke from dreams of fire, chest heaving, heart hammering. Sometimes she felt the weight of steel again pressing her ribs, choking her breath. Sometimes she swore she heard his voice, "Move, Noelle, move." But when she opened her eyes, it was only the empty barracks room around her. The ring on her hand caught the moonlight in those moments. Scratched steel, carved trident, proof of survival, proof of cost. She turned it slowly, letting the light catch on each mark, a reminder that nothing came without scars. One evening, after a long day of after-action reviews and debriefs, she sat alone on the concrete steps outside the operations wing. The air was sharp with winter cold, her breath forming small clouds. Footsteps approached. She didn't look up until Hayes sat down beside her. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, he said softly, "You're carrying them again, aren't you?" Her jaw tightened. "They never leave." Hayes glanced down at his hands, then at hers. "I know what that feels like." She turned her head, studying him in silence. He looked tired but different than before. Stronger, his posture, his voice steadier. She had seen him change piece by piece over the past weeks, but scars recognized scars. "You said once," he continued, "that survival is about carrying. I've been thinking maybe that's what leadership really is. Not about being the loudest voice, not about medals. It's carrying the weight for others until they can carry it themselves." She looked back at the horizon, stars sharp against the black. His words landed heavier than he realized. For a moment she thought of Dalton, the day he had seen her ring and forced her into the light. He had carried the decision to trust her when no one else would. And now, somehow, she was doing the same for Hayes. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "why we're the ones left standing?" Her throat tightened. She took a slow breath. "Every day." He nodded, didn't press further. Some questions didn't have answers. The days rolled on. Missions came and went, each one sharpening her place in the structure. She wasn't just part of Task Force Lumen anymore. She was at its center. Officers who once questioned her now sought her analysis first. Her voice carried weight in rooms that had ignored it. But with recognition came unease. Not everyone celebrated her rise. Some whispered that Dalton favored her unfairly. Some muttered about how unusual it was for a sergeant, especially a woman, to hold such sway over operational planning. She heard the whispers but never answered them. Because she knew the truth, respect wasn't given. It was earned in silence, in the moments where lives hung on decisions no one else wanted to make. One afternoon, as she prepared for another briefing, she caught sight of herself in the mirror of the locker room. The reflection startled her. Her uniform was immaculate, every line crisp. Her face was calm, steady. But her eyes carried shadows deeper than any metal could mask. She thought of the young lieutenant who had walked into the back of that Washington meeting, invisible, ignored. She thought of herself, years earlier, pouring coffee while others planned wars. And she realized she was no longer either of them. She was something else now. A bridge between the unseen and the undeniable. That evening, Dalton summoned her. His office was spare, its walls bare except for a framed map and a single commendation plaque. He sat behind his desk, posture as precise as always. "You've become more than an asset," he said plainly. She waited silent. "You've become a mirror. For every operator who feels buried, overlooked, dismissed, you are proof." She shifted slightly, discomfort flickering in her chest. "I didn't ask for that." "No one does," Dalton replied. "But sometimes we don't choose what we carry. Sometimes it chooses us." Her gaze dropped to the ring again. He followed her eyes. "They never leave us," he said quietly. "The ones we lose, the ghosts, but the way we honor them is not by drowning under their weight. It's by carrying others forward. That is dignity. That is leadership." She swallowed, throat tight, but said nothing. Dalton leaned back, his tone softening. "I've watched you, you don't speak often, but when you do, the room listens. That is rare, don't waste it." She nodded once, words unnecessary. As she left his office, she felt the weight of his words pressing as heavily as any mission order. That night she dreamed again, but this time it wasn't only fire and steel. It was grins muttering like steady eyes. They stood in the surf at, waves crashing, sand sticking to skin. She remembered their hands linked with hers, refusing to let go despite exhaustion. When she woke, her chest ached, but not only with grief, with something else, something closer to resolve. Because Dalton was right. She hadn't chosen this role, but it had chosen her. And now she had to carry it. In the weeks that followed, the symbol of her presence grew. Hayes wasn't the only one who gravitated toward her now. Others came quietly, operators with scars, with stories of being overlooked, with questions they didn't dare ask anyone else. Some only wanted a nod. Some only needed a few words. Noel gave what she could, not speeches, not grand advice, just presence, just recognition, the kind Dalton had once given her. And slowly, she began to realize that leadership wasn't about erasing ghosts. It was about ensuring no one else became one. But she also knew something else. Symbols attract tests. And soon, the battlefield would test her again. Not in briefing rooms, not in operations tents, but in fire. And this time, the cost would be higher. Why did the desert always smell the same before violence? Noel crouched in the dust at the edge of another nameless town, the air thick with the acrid tang of oil and rust. The mission brief had been clear. Intercept a weapons transfer, recover intel on a hidden network and bring everyone back alive. Clear on paper, never clear in reality. The moon was thin tonight, the sky sharp with stars, but shadows ruled the streets ahead. Crumbling buildings leaned over narrow alleys, windows dark, doors sealed like the town itself was holding its breath. Somewhere inside, the transfer was happening. Somewhere inside, the trap waited. Her headset crackled with quiet confirmations. Alpha held at the south alley. Bravo positioned on the east perimeter. Charlie covered rooftops. Hayes was at her side, his eyes flicking between his tablet and the streets, tracking heat signatures with precision. 7 targets confirmed, he whispered, but too much movement. I count at least 4 more in shadow. She nodded once. Instinct matched his numbers. The board wasn't balanced. Something was missing. Dalton's voice came faint over command relay. You've got green light. Execute when ready. Her chest tightened. Not fear, not exactly. Something deeper. The memory of Claude at her ribs, the blast echoing her brother's silence afterward. She closed her eyes for half a breath, grounding herself in the ring pressing against her glove. Not then, now. Alpha, move, she ordered. They slipped forward, shadows against darker shadow. Bravo adjusted wide. Charlie's rifles swept the rooftops, silent and watchful. Hayes murmured coordinates under his breath, every syllable tight. The first contact was fast. A guard stepped into the alley, rifle slung, unaware. Alpha's suppressed shot dropped him before his radio clicked alive. The body slumped soundlessly against the wall. Inside the compound, muffled voices carried, crates being shifted, metal clanging, men speaking in hurried tones. Convoys loading, Hayes whispered. We've got minutes. Alpha breach. The door shattered inward. Chaos erupted. Shouts. Gunfire suppressed but sharp. The compound lit in flashes of red tracer and the stutter of automatic bursts. Noel pressed forward, not in the breach but close enough to feel the air change. Her role wasn't pulling triggers anymore. It was holding the whole board in her head. Bravo, push north, cut the flank. Copy. Charlie, suppress east wall, 2 shooters on your left. Engaging. The comms filled with clipped voices, each one feeding her choices, each one trusting her to see the whole when they only saw fragments. And for a moment it worked. The enemy scrambled, Alpha advanced, Bravo pinned, Charlie cut down shadows from above. Then it shifted. A roar tore through the night, the grind of an armored vehicle starting, its engine deep, deliberate. Hayes' head snapped toward his tablet. Heavy signature, South Alley. That's no truck, that's armor. Her chest clenched. Alpha was closest, exposed. Alpha, fall back south now. But the vehicle crashed forward, headlights flaring, a mounted gun sweeping. Bullets ripped across the alley, sparks and stone exploding. Screams through comms, not death but pain. 2 hit, we're pinned. Her breath caught, again, the voices, the weight. Hayes grabbed her arm, eyes sharp. Call it. Her voice locked in her throat. For one instant, ghosts drowned her. His name. Silence, Lake's eyes starring through dust. Hayes' voice cut again, fierce. They're alive, Noel, don't freeze now. Her head snapped back. Not then, now. Her voice broke through, sharper than steel. Bravo, flank that armor. RPG from east now. Copy. Charlie, blind their gunner. Suppress roof angle 12 o'clock. On it. Alpha, smoke and pull north. Move wounded first. The battlefield shifted with her words. Bravo streaked fire across the alley. An explosion tore through the night, rocking the armored vehicle onto its side. Charlie's rifles cracked, cutting the gunner before he could recover. Alpha dragged their wounded back through smoke, voices straining but alive. The board balanced again, barely. Noel's breath came sharp, sweat slicking her temples. She hadn't realized her hands were shaking until she clenched them tight. Hayes' voice steadied beside her. You pulled them out. You didn't let repeat. She didn't answer, she couldn't. Her chest was too tight. But she moved, she couldn't stop. Alpha secure crates, Bravo sweep for intel, Charlie hold perimeter. They pushed again, clearing rooms, recovering documents, dragging crates heavy with weapons out of the compound. The fight still raged in pockets, shots cracked, shouts echoed, but the center was theirs. And then silence. The last hostile fell, the compound stilled, only the rasp of breathing filled the comms. Objective secured, Alpha reported. Her knees nearly buckled in relief. She pressed her palm against the wall, grounding herself. For the first time since the blast began, her voice faltered, soft. Copy all teams. The walk back through the desert was endless. The stars overhead blurred, sweat stinging her eyes. Her body moved on instinct, her mind still trapped between past and present. She didn't speak again until the bird lifted them skyward, the desert shrinking beneath. Only then did she let herself close her eyes, the headset still buzzing faintly in her ear. Dalton's voice came through, calm as always. Mission complete, minimal injuries, no fatalities, well done. But the word well stuck in her chest like stone. Hours later, back at base, she sat alone in the dim light of the debrief room. Papers lay scattered, radios silent. Her reflection stared back from the dark window, eyes hollow, shoulders heavy. Hayes entered quietly. He didn't knock. He just set his notebook down on the table and sat. "You froze," he said simply. Her jaw clenched. She didn't look at him. "And then," he continued, softer now, "you didn't. You saved them, all of them. That's the only truth that matters." Her throat tightened. The words she wanted to say, "I almost lost them," burned in her chest, but she stayed silent. Hayes leaned forward, voice low. "Lake, you carry them every day, but tonight wasn't theirs. Tonight was ours, and you carried us through." The silence between them stretched, but this time it wasn't empty. Finally, Noel whispered, her voice raw. "I don't know how many more times I can do this." Hayes' reply was steady. "As many times as it takes, until there's no one left to bury." Her eyes met his, and for the first time she didn't just see a lieutenant looking for a place. She saw a reflection of herself, a survivor who had chosen to keep carrying. Dalton entered then, his boots steady, his gaze sharp. He studied them both. For a moment his eyes softened, something unspoken in the weight of his nod. "The war doesn't forgive hesitation," he said, "but it forgives nothing less than the resolve to rise after it. You rose, remember that." Then he left them in silence again. Noel sat back, eyes burning, chest heavy. But in the hollow ache of exhaustion, a thought whispered. She had been tested tonight, nearly broken, nearly dragged back into the silence of. But she had chosen, she had carried. And though the ghosts didn't leave, they no longer walked alone. Because Hayes carried too. Why was it easier to lead men into fire than to face the silence after? The compound mission had ended days ago, yet Noel still felt the dust in her lungs, the echo of gunfire in her ears. Her body had recovered, her voice steady in the debriefings, but inside she carried the tremor of almost freezing, almost losing them, almost repeating. The difference was simple. This time they had come back. But victories didn't silence ghosts. They only changed their shapes. At Meridian Base, the corridors hummed with the low rhythm of military life, boots striking tile, radios murmuring, doors opening and closing in constant cadence. Noel walked through it now, not as shadow, not as ignored, but as something else. Men and women glanced at her with recognition. Some nodded, some whispered, some simply made space when she passed. She never sought it, but she didn't hide from it anymore either. Dalton's judgment had been vindicated again and again. Each mission she led tightened the circle of trust, erased the doubts, forced respect from those who once dismissed her. But respect carried its own price. She was no longer invisible. She was a mirror. And mirrors reflected things others didn't want to see. One evening, she sat in the planning hall long after most had gone. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, her shadow stretching across the table littered with maps and reports. She was tracing routes absently with her finger when the door opened softly. Hayes stepped inside. He had lost some of the hunch in his posture. He moved differently now, more certain, more anchored. His notebook was still in his hand, but he didn't cling to it like before. "You're still here," he said quietly. "So are you." He smiled faintly, a shadow of weariness behind it. "Dalton wants me reassigned, back into operations, not admin. He said you signed the recommendation." Her eyes didn't leave the map. "I did." Silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the lights. Finally, Hayes said, "You pulled me out. You saw me when no one else did. I won't forget that." Her eyes lifted at last, steady on him. "Dalton did the same for me. That's how it works. You carry forward." His jaw tightened with unspoken emotion. He nodded once. "Then I'll carry it too." The words lingered between them. Not an oath, not ceremony, just truth. Weeks later, Washington again. The Joint Interagency Command Hall, larger than any room Noel had once imagined herself standing in. Representatives filled the seats. SEALs, Rangers, CIA, NSA. The stakes higher than ever. And at the head of the table sat Noel. Not in shadow, not with a carafe, with command. Her voice carried across the room, calm, precise, unshakable. She laid out timelines, assets, contingencies. Eyes tracked her, pens scratched, every directive taken as law. Dalton sat near the back, silent, watching with the faint pride of a man who had made the right choice and no longer needed to prove it. Halfway through the meeting, the door opened. A young Marine corporal slipped inside, clipboard in hand, posture tentative, his eyes avoiding contact. He moved to the corner, silent, nearly invisible. Noel's gaze caught on him. She noticed the way he angled his chair toward the exits, the way his shoulders curved inward, as if waiting to be dismissed. She remembered that posture, that silence, that weight. The meeting closed. Officers filed out, papers stacked, conversations resuming in the hallway. The corporal gathered his things quickly, trying not to linger. "Wait," Noel said softly but firmly. He froze. She crossed to him, her boots steady against the tile. "Corporal, I saw the way you tracked every note. That wasn't clerical. What's your background?" He hesitated. His throat worked. Finally, he murmured, "Scout sniper, ma'am. Injured last deployment. They've got me on admin until they decide what to do with me." Her eyes dropped to his sleeve. A faint outline of ink. A badge faded but unmistakable. Recognition struck her instantly, the same way Dalton had once seen her ring. She extended her hand. He blinked, surprised, before taking it. Her grip was firm, her eyes steady. "We need to talk," she said. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. In that moment, she understood the circle had closed fully. Once she had been the one overlooked, dismissed, invisible in the corner. Dalton had seen her. He had carried her forward. Now it was her turn to see others, to carry them. Not as savior, not as hero, as proof. Proof that silence didn't mean weakness. Proof that dignity didn't shout. It acted. Weeks passed. Missions shifted. Lives were risked, saved, carried. And through it all, Noel's presence grew, not in volume, not in spectacle, but in weight. The kind of weight that didn't need announcement. One night, long after the command hall had emptied, Noel stood alone under the cold glow of a single lamp. Papers scattered, maps folded, silence pressing. She slipped the ring off her finger, turning it slowly in her hand. The steel was scratched, worn from years. She thought of Lake, their faces, their voices, their absence. And then she thought of Hayes, of the corporal in the corner, of the others who would come. She slid the ring back on and whispered into the silence, too soft for anyone else to hear. "I'm still carrying." Her voice didn't shake. Because she understood now. Survival wasn't about erasing ghosts. It was about honoring them, not with words, not with medals, but with the act of carrying others forward. And that was her legacy. Not coffee poured in silence, not invisibility, but dignity, unspoken, steady, unyielding. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.